Welcome, intrepid and hardy souls, to the further discussions of studying ground at the RF level. Now, I've revealed through past discussions how Earth presents a resistance. Even if it is the source of infinite current, getting that current between points can be problematic, especially if they're large currents and we have hazards to consider, like becoming electrocuted through a lightning bolt proximity. So ground impacts station performance here. And RF brings a lot of complexity to this because now we're not penetrating the soil with a stake, we're penetrating it with our own signal. Now I'm going to skip over to my my drawing here. Here we can see that I have a quarter wave tall monopole, and we'll go into the discussion of how things are designed and all the relationships that go there. But let's say that it's over what would be considered a perfect ground of 120 half wavelength radials. So they're roughly twice the length or the height of the monopole. This is FCC standards derived from the Brown, Lewis, and Epstein papers of mid-30s, 1936, I believe. Now, in this illustration, the antenna has, I'm just isolating this to current and the current penetration into this ground structure and beneath it into the soil layers below. So think of this as a current going down into the earth, circulating through it, returning, and coming back to the tip of the antenna. Now this is, I'm expressing this in direct current terms, and certainly we're not talking about direct current. This is just showing you relative lines of path, and because we're in what's called the near field of the antenna design, and things are not linear by any stretch of the imagination. But this serves to illustrate the concepts rather than the realities. Some of the realities will converge with the concepts as I illustrated, so let's begin. At this outer layer, think of this as a hemisphere of current, a bubble of current expanding out. At this point, we have what's called square law kind of dissipation. Dissipation here, loss down there. So what's started out with 4 lines of current, out in this shell is 3 lines of current, 2 lines, 1 line. And lines, what I mean by line is just a method of emphasizing. It's like the intensity of the current in this region. So like 4 amps, 3 amps, 2 amps, 1 amps, that kind of thing. So, must be noted that most of the current is close to the antenna. And Brown, Lewis, and Epstein found that if they go from a quarter wave antenna down to a 10th wave antenna, this current increases, but performance doesn't suffer, except for ground losses. Hence, a lot of copper in this region is beneficial to returning that current to the system to radiate. However, this current is going to penetrate the earth and circulate through it. And the earth is a big resistor. And that means our current is going through this resistor and returning. Now, I can't illustrate paths quite yet because this current is not going to penetrate very far into the earth if we have the wrong frequency. At the Brown, Lewis, and Epstein measurements of 3 megahertz, this was considered fairly. Out at VHF, UHF, no problems, it's all the same. But down lower, we have to consider this graph. Let's see if I can. Oh. So here I have 4 types of ground, or ground in sense of earth. The earth beneath our feet, the soil. In fact, this is this right here, seawater, is perfect soil conditions and is better than you could hope for, unless you live on the coast and your antenna happens to be sitting in seawater. That's not something you should aspire to, given the salinity is a very corrosive feature to metals. However, returning to very good earth soils, average or poor, we can see over on this side soil skin depth, and down here frequency. So 3 megahertz is roughly right here on this plot of frequency. This is, for a very good soil, is going to result in hitting that at about, 1.5 meters deep. For average soil, that's going to turn out to be about, maybe 3 to 5 meters deep. And that's quite considerable if you have to dig it out. And over poor soil, excuse me, this is much like a mountaintop. This would be a mountaintop with crushed gravel that is well soaked, percolating. This is just dry mountaintop or desert. Out here, the skin depth is on the order of 20, something less than 20, poor, 3 megahertz. Let's call it 15 meters. That's considerable in its own right. So, returning to so this resistance varies by the soil that's beneath your antenna. And if I were to illustrate how those paths might appear, let's say for a very poor soil out here, we would have that kind of scenario. However, with a seawater, it would be like that. Almost no penetration whatever and returning directly. And this is approaching the metal layer that we're approximating using 120 half-wave radials. So what would you, with 120 half-wave radials, the performance of this antenna is the same as if this were seawater that the antenna was sitting over. If we were to have less radials, okay, this is going to be a little sketchy. Just a few right here. We're going to have all of this current return. But this is going to get lossy. This is going to get lossy. And this is going to be lossy. So, where most of our current is being served well, actually, by these short radials. I still have this long one out here. And the remainder of the penetrating currents, well, they see resistance and they're giving off heat. So you're just heating the soil at that term. However, if we look at this 4, 3, 2, 1, so it's a varying. It's not as much. If we hadn't anything there, yes, it's a big resistor. Having even this short ground system, you're doing pretty fair. If it was bigger, better yet. If it was out to 120 half-wave radials, perfect. So that's the variety of conditions that you can find beneath the Earth by virtue of what it's composed of and how it's going to affect the efficiency of your radio system. And in giving us a value for that resistance, we'll get into that later, but this is the start. So ground is pretty complex. It varies by many factors that are outside of our control, except for just moving across states until you find the right ground, or moving within a state to get closer to, well, pasture land, or meadows, or estuaries. This is why you find big AM antenna farms out in flat areas or on mountaintops. Either way, they still have their 120 radials underneath them. So it's kind of overkill in that sense. But it costs money to transmit AM content, and the powers that be, they want all the signal going out that they can, even if it's just a quarter dB more. That's about as much as it would be. So at some point we'll get into these dB differences and what it means to you. I discussed that earlier in getting a 3 dB gain. That was your low-hanging fruit, because it's going to be a struggle from here. But we have other things to talk about, and it'll probably be ground again. But this time we'll start moving up the antenna and looking at it. 73s.